as I said, I give the floor to Dr. Cook, who will chair this session. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Michelle. So yes, so we've got a couple of talks just now coming up, linking back to some of the discussions we were having earlier about some of the impacts of energy infrastructure on migratory species. So we've got a couple of talks from Steffen Oppel from the RSPB and from Chris Thaxter and Liam Innes from BTO and RGI, and they're going to sort of describe some of the work that they've been doing, looking at how we sort of assess the impacts of infrastructure on migrating birds and some of the challenges that we face in that. We'll be having a sort of question and answer session after these two talks. So please, if anything comes to mind while you're listening to them, either sort of stick it in the chat or save it for the end of the talk, and we'll come to you at that point. But first up, we're going to have a talk from Steffen Oppel about some of the work he's been doing, looking at energy infrastructure and some of the migratory soaring birds in the Mediterranean flyway. Steffen.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for inviting me to this meeting. I will take the opportunity to highlight some of our recent research that was done in the framework of a big EU life-funded project led by the Birdlife partner in Bulgaria that demonstrates that energy infrastructure is actually a key threat to migratory soaring birds along the Eastern Mediterranean flyway. And hopefully the screen will move. Yes. So we all know that birds migrate long distances, and this is a spectacular phenomenon, but it brings a problem with it that when a population of birds is declining in a certain part of its range, and in this case, we are looking at the Egyptian vulture in Eastern Europe, birds that migrate across continents are exposed to threats along their flyways. This map shows you the birds that we have tracked in this project, and you can see that their tracks go across 3 continents from Southern Europe through the Middle East, all over Africa. So when a population in Europe is declining, we potentially have to look at threats to this species in many countries along the flyway. It's not enough to just work in the country where the population is that we're interested in. So in the framework of this big project to save Egyptian vultures in Eastern Europe, we try to find out what the key threats are to the species along the flyway. We assembled partners in 13 countries along the flyway, and we conducted work on the ground to survey power lines and quantify the electrocution and the collision rates in 13 countries. And we also conducted interviews and many other works in those countries to identify which threats are the most important in the different countries. We also tagged more than 70 birds with miniature GPS trackers, like the bird you see on the photo on the left. And that tells us where these birds die. And when we then recover the carcass of these birds, we can find out why the birds have died. And the map on the right shows you the causes of mortality that we found within this project. So electrocution are the red triangles, and you can see there are red triangles in Turkey, there's one in Bulgaria, there's some in the Middle East, in Israel and in Jordan, and then there's a couple of in Ethiopia, whereas other causes like persecution or poisoning also exist along the flyway. So we took all the evidence that we gathered from ground surveys and from tracking birds to create a table of the priority risks in each country, and they vary a lot amongst the continents and the countries along the flyway. And this table summarizes this for the 5 main threats: poisoning, electrocution and collision, persecution, habitat loss, and disturbance for each country. So the ranking goes from 0, meaning the threat is absent in a particular country, to 5, which means it's very severe and it's ubiquitous in the country. You can see that each country has a different threat map or a different ranking of threats. And what we're looking here at in particular is the electrocution and collision risk at power infrastructure. And you see that this exists pretty much along the entire flyway. There's only 2 countries where this risk is very low, Niger and Nigeria. And that's for the very simple reason that in Niger, there's hardly any power lines. And in Nigeria, there are no more vultures because they all get shot and sold on markets. But the risk of electrocution and collision is very high in Ethiopia, in Turkey, and in Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and in Egypt. So why is this risk so pervasive and so widespread along the flyway? We have a very widespread electrocution risk because in many countries, there is a very poor design of small distribution power poles. So these pictures are from Turkey, from Jordan, and from Ethiopia. And you can see the standard typical design of these small distribution lines is one with a horizontal crossbar and 3 upright pin insulators. That design is very dangerous to birds because large birds can land on the crossbar and then either touch both energized wires or the metal crossbar. And so the electricity runs through the body of the bird, leading to electrocution. So this design is very dangerous and is known to cause electrocution. And this is not something that we found in our research. This has been known for 50 years. This is an excerpt of a paper from 1972, so it was published exactly 50 years ago, where somebody described the mortality of vultures caused by that exact process. So although we have known for 50 years that this design of power pole construction is very dangerous, it still persists today. So we followed up with a case study in Ethiopia. Ethiopia has a booming electricity market. The National Electrification Plan in Ethiopia anticipates to connect millions of households to centralized electricity by 2030, which will result to the construction of about 20,000 kilometers of new distribution lines. And all of these lines that we could see being built in the field rely on this outdated and dangerous design with a concrete pole, a metal crossbar, and 3 upright pin insulators that will cause a lot of electrocution. So based on our data and extrapolations, we estimate that these new lines alone could kill thousands of large birds every year. That picture is from a line that was built or was under construction in 2019 when we were there. And it's built right next to an export abattoir, which is a place where every day hundreds of goat carcasses are discarded that attract large birds like vultures and marabou storks that scavenge on these carcasses and then roost on these pylons and get electrocuted. So it is a disaster waiting to happen, not only for birds, but it will also not provide a reliable electricity supply because there are outages that are guaranteed if you use that design in areas where large birds congregate. So in order to avoid this, we need to collaborate. And we need projects that finance electricity supply in countries to fund only safe pole designs. We don't understand who makes the decisions about what kind of pole design is being used. But in our surveys, we found that, for example, in Syria, most of the distribution lines use this design that have suspended wires, which are much, much safer for birds to roost on because they're very unlikely to get in touch with the energized components. The same design is being used in Morocco. So it's evidently possible to use that kind of pole design in the environments that we looked at. But for some reason, these designs are not being used. And we suspect that it has something to do with these designs being slightly more expensive. So if the funding is made available to make these designs safer, that would be a massive improvement. We also need to think about the infrastructure that already exists and that needs to be refurbished. There are tens of thousands of kilometers of power lines that need to be refurbished. Not all of them are very dangerous because some are in areas where there are no birds or very few birds. So it'd be very useful to get data from all the utility corporations where they experience the most problems with outages caused by a bird strike and by electrocution, so that we could then invest into refurbish those lines, for example, by insulating them. And Liam will talk about a project how data sharing could be achieved. But at the end of the day, we need governments to mandate standards that reduce the risk to wildlife from all the infrastructure that is built to distribute energy. And this is very important if we start expanding, especially renewable energy, solar and wind farms that are being built in rural areas, and the energy then needs to be transported. That will result in large grids of electricity distribution lines being built, and we need to make sure that they don't make the risk to wildlife worse. Thank you very much.